Our guest speaker today is Mel Horvath-Lucid, and she was ordained in 2014 in the spiritualist tradition and is a Buddhist meditation teacher and interfaith spiritual director. Mel is a healthy congregations facilitator who works with congregations through times of change, reimagining, and transition. Mel also works within a restorative justice organization and focuses on practices and ways of being that restore, repair, transform, and heal. Their pronouns are they, them. Welcome today's speaker, Mel Horvath-Lucid, Choice and Change.
All righty, good morning. Just gonna get myself organized here and get set up, and then we'll begin. So this morning we're focusing on choice and change, and I want to invite you first to think about places for which you've been knocked off your center for choice and change, where your choice and change center has been knocked offline. I was invited to speak this morning. One of the first of 3 books that are currently in the process of being published is a story for all ages called A Serious Case of the Cants. And I realize now that it is part reflective of what it means to live fearlessly as ourselves towards authenticity, towards realness, towards who we fully and wholly are. And that isn't about creating all of that. That's about uncovering the blocks we have to the fullness of who we already are. I also realized now that it was half memoir, that my experience of life had many experiences where it turned me towards a felt helplessness, where when I was a child, there was power over me, and I couldn't say, couldn't do the things that would be real and authentic to me. And sometimes what happens when those experiences happen to us when we are younger is we carry that psyche, that way of being, into when we are older. And so it's been a journey for me of lovingly parenting myself, of being for the littler me and me now what I would have needed then, to be for myself now what I would have needed then. So conditions like childhood, school, then work, where you largely do what's required of you. These things are present and connected as part of this journey. So it's noticing, it's coming back into awareness of, where and who in your childhood told you what you could and couldn't be. And we're talking really about those inherent aspects of ourselves. So we are talking about identities. We're talking about school, where largely we're told what it is that's valuable or not valuable. And an easy example of this one is that my 5 children are raised in a household with parents who model mixed ways of learning and mixed ways of valuing. And yet my eldest child gets to university and meets the moment where she realizes she's driven by a story that isn't her own. And the story was that girls can do STEM, science, technology, engineering, math too. And so therefore I should do that. So to push for the fact that I can do that, now I find myself in a career I don't want to be in, that's against who I truly am and what I truly wish to be doing. Because that was the strong conditioning within the school system at the time, was girls can do STEM too. Well, of course they can. The more interesting question is that authentic to who you are? And what choices and pathways do you have towards that? And then work. We volunteer to be contractually obligated to tasks and responsibilities for a fee. And so we co-opt some of our being out into this world in order to make money, in order to survive. And so we largely do what's required of us. And that's where, when I was listening to the consciousness, the vision of this center, I just, you are sitting in potent medicine of what it means to hold the complexities of spirituality. And I couldn't agree more. And I say that because if I say something that bristles you today, I'm inviting you to stay curious about why. I'm inviting you to notice, because I could not more wholeheartedly agree with what it looks like to step into our authenticity and fullness. It may also be that part of what knocks us off of our choice and change center is a heavy and consistent pressure on what is good. And our stories around what is good and bad and what can exist and not exist largely cause us to create distance or meaning making, rapid meaning making as a means of coping, create distance between being with what is. And that will knock us off of our choice and change center. It will take us back to that top sort of texture of, ugh, this is the way it is, and there's nothing I can do about it. And so as we move back into choice and power and we come back online, we start to see that we have different powers and possibilities. It's also possible, too, that choice and change, when we talk about it from a systemic or an oppressive lens, is that there was lack of actual resources, lack of the ability to meet the core basic needs: clean water, food, shelter, air, love, care in an unconditional way. That, of course, impacts us. So we have things that have impacted us away from our center. I want to share a moment with you a little bit more about who I am. And I want to articulate the difference for a moment between decolonizing and uncolonizing. Decolonizing is the work that we are required to do to look at the land that we are on that is not ours and return it. This is largely government-owned land that belongs to Indigenous people. That is the work of decolonizing. The work of uncolonizing is the work that each of us is responsible for, to be accountable and responsible for the ways for which we step into each other's lanes, and we also don't tend to our own business. Tending to our own business is being able to look at the ecosystem that is us, to understand that we are actually infinite universes within. And if we have articulated part of those universes as somehow bad or wrong, we may seek to press down or repress or dismiss or ignore those aspects of ourselves. To the degree that we do that, we will then, unfortunately, tend to dismiss or ignore others. Put another way, we may end up quite frozen. So part of this work is the work that this center holds dear. It's the center of reflecting on who you are as a being. And so the perspective I offer is inspired and impacted by my own life experience. And what I'm suggesting here is, as I share my story, you too bring an inspiration and an impact from your own life experiences. This is the medicine and the wisdom. When I think about this and uncolonizing, which is looking at the ways for which we've come into this place of not being able to stay in our own lanes, not being able to hold our own. I acknowledge that I carry a history of German and Hungarian ancestors who fled their homeland here to Canada. I'm actually the first generation born here. Means that my ancestors' original knowledge from their home country was actually still quite present. This history has shaped my fears and conditionings, making me afraid of anything that was different from myself and expecting others to conform as well. I see the ways that my family gave up language, culture, traditions, and their home wisdom to come here. I see how they, and now me, expected others to do the same, as though this was part of the contract to being alive, compromising who you are at your core and surviving. I've learned to challenge these ideas and embrace vulnerability, authenticity, and honesty. 5 years ago for me, that meant that I decided to express my queerness. I'm a proud member of the rainbow community, wild creative. I also managed 2 autoimmune conditions and offered my true self to the world despite the risks. This experience of authenticating myself has been both challenging and healing. as I refused to wait for the world to change. Growing up in a strict Christian family, I experienced internalized shame for much of who I was. And I sought to sort of systematically abandon myself to fit in. And this led to a lack of fulfillment and deep sadness. It led to feeling completely separate and othered in a world that we know as oneness. And that is because the inner universe of me was separated. It was like I cut off all the parts of me until it was kind of like Swiss cheese. I didn't know who I was. My current focus on uncolonization is intentionally distancing myself from practices that perpetuate oppression, racism, and othering. Instead, I work towards common humanity with care, accountability for how my ancestors' survival mode has influenced me and the systems around me. I aim to confront and address the pain and trauma within myself and with others with courage and consistency. This work is voluntary and significant for me. It's also a fascinating shift because the transformation seems to be coming from a place and capacity to hold more of who I am and to meet that, particularly those pieces that would seem uncomfortable or unpleasant. When I think about this wisdom, I'm actually drawn, even with more Buddhist sensibilities, to the Wampum Belt, a treaty that's actually still in effect today, though unfortunately we struggle immensely to follow it. These beaded rows reflect the ways for which First Nations peoples sought to communicate to those coming to set in the land, the colonizers, how to stay in your own lane with peace and respect. Just give us room to be who we are. And yet, unfortunately, so many times, and I think it's really important to notice, we all struggle with it, to stay in our own lane and to tend to that first, to choose to fearlessly be ourselves in authenticity is to make room for other people to do the same. When we don't do that, we find ourselves erasing language, culture, ways of being, ways of doing, and deeper understanding. And we do this because in some ways, those narrow ways of being where we try to corral people can feel safer. I would also suggest they feel more constricted and they miss aspects of our inner universes and aspects of one another. In line with much of what it looks like to hold spirituality practical, I generally tend to speak in terms of practical tools. So the first tool I want us to explore is compassionate and critical reflection. The ability to hold this posture in the world, this is a concept, a lens, a way of being, is to reflect on our life, to choose to willfully look back where we need to look forward where we need to feel what is emerging. And so for me, this reflection on our lives grows our insight into how these aspects, experiences, and identity inform our present. To do this is to begin to understand that there isn't one way to experience anything. So we release this need for sameness, this idea that we are all here on the quest for a spiritual journey and that spiritual journey will be same. No, it's the power of collective that says we are all here exploring our spirituality and it will emerge as it does, more like a rich ecosystem of diverse species and flowers and ways of being, yet threads that connect us through there that we can start to see when we practice things collectively. Critical thinking is one of the most key misunderstood things because critical has oftentimes felt like a judgment texture. So I want to articulate critical is actually a posture towards open-mindedness, room for complexity and nuance, and the ability to know that there is more. If you were only to take one thing from this talk that I'm offering you today, it would be to stay curious that there may always be more. There is always more to see, more to learn, more to understand. So in Western culture, and this is wisdom from Alan Watts, a Buddhist teacher, in Western culture, we're oftentimes taught to like read line by line. Yet we don't look at landscapes that way. We look and we surveil landscapes. And as we go closer to those landscapes, we can see something different when we zoom into any given section. I would suggest that when we do the same with our inner selves, with our inner universes, we can start to zoom into various areas of ourselves and see something different than what we saw before. It would be tough actually to have time from this place to be in other people's lanes. This work is full-time work. This practice of being in and with the complexity and the allness of who we are, it takes time and energy, and it's worth it. There is something I have learned about living an ethical life, and that it's sustainable. It doesn't cause the same burnout. So when we find who we authentically are, there is an earthing, a grounding, a rooting that is sustainable there. And then I would add a piece of compassionate critical reflection. Compassion is this gentleness. It's a texture of a way of being that holds what arises while also being a space maker for dealing with difficult things, including aspects of ourselves, our own thoughts and words of actions that we maybe wish weren't there. We can transform from learned helplessness. And again, I articulate that as that place where at one point, probably there was power over you and you couldn't turn away. You couldn't look in different directions. You couldn't do something different. To choicefulness, which is a word that does not exist currently in our language, but I can find a close second to it, which is hopefulness. And so one of the trademarks or the hallmark pieces for choicefulness is understanding that there's paths. Understanding that there's paths at any given moment, and understanding we're at choice. This is easier to do if it looks like the description more on the left with just simply arrows. More challenging to do if we are placing a right, wrong, choice, decision sort of framework to it. But if we simply say, what paths can I see without that judgment or meaning making, we can start to open back up space, even in those very difficult to be with moments. The second tool I want to offer you is actually a tool from Brené Brown. And this is a practical tool around hope. There's a few different hope textures that I would offer you this morning. The first one is more of an ethereal, external, undefinable, passive hope. In my work, it sounds like people who will say, well, I would like to hope that we can insert trust each other, move forward in a good way, work collectively, whatever it is. I would like to hope that in an ethereal way. They place it outside themselves. It's passive, it's undefinable. And then for many years of my life, I actually spent significant time within the Buddhist perspective of hopelessness. And that sounds really daunting, particularly for those of us who have a relationship with hope that helps spur us on and keep us going. What I found of this Buddhist perspective of hopelessness, though, was that it was actually inviting me to accept what is while still maintaining choice and power. And the example that I'll offer is my decision to express my queerness of mind, of gender, of sexual orientation within a world that has largely said that is not okay. In a world where there's experiences of hate and harm that do seek to erase my existence, because that existence challenges somebody to see that there's choices and change. And that can be incredibly agitating when somebody has themselves given up their right to choice and change. So meaning, in other words, I haven't found it me particularly that people are offended by. It's the idea that I'm standing here making a different choice, saying you can change, to someone who might not be willing, able, or ready to step into their power, to see that they have choice. And I hold again a sense of compassion for that, because imagine if you were raised every day, told that this is the way it has to be, this is what you need to do, this is what's good, this is what's right, this is what's okay and not okay. And little effort or energy was spent with people who could say being who you are is okay. And we can be with that, even the tough things. We can stay connected in the perceived struggle, so to speak. So the Hope Practical tool is actually from Brene Brown, and it comes from her research in studying what she considered to be very hope-filled people. And she found these 3 capacities within very hope-filled people. The first one is that they have goals. I can say I hope to run a marathon, but if I have no goals towards doing that, it's unlikely I'm going to run a marathon. Can I see pathways to getting to that goal of, say, running a marathon? And I see a multitude of ways through which I could do or achieve this goal. And then the third one is, do I believe I can do it? Now, here's the part where usually it gets sticky for people, so I'll try to do my best to explain this. If I believe I can't run a marathon, maybe it's true that I can't. I actually literally don't currently have the capacity to run a marathon. Okay. So I don't currently have the capacity to, quote, run a marathon. You could say, but maybe you could walk it. Maybe I could. Maybe I could walk it over several days. Maybe I could start slow and come up with small goals toward it. Okay, great. Now we're moving from 3 to 1. What are my goals towards it? What pathways do I see? And do I believe I can do it? And potentially it is in finding that small step forward with that small goal I can do today that supports my goal of running a marathon tomorrow. I can find myself in a place where I believe I can do it. Here's the thing about this tool. Desire is not negotiable. Desire is not negotiable. And the truth of the matter is, I don't desire to run a marathon right now. So it's also equally important for me to be able to say, I actually don't want to invest in the goals, pathways towards that right now. Then it would probably take me back into a curious practice of what is it I would actually desire to do. And then I start to create goals towards that. And that's a little tool, a little snapshot of how we can move away from maybe what the world says we're supposed to do, and then us trying to make ourselves want to do it, and coming to a place of emerging from within desire towards something, creating goals and pathways, and starting to come into that texture of belief we can do it through these small, tangible steps towards. When we hold space toward those small tangible steps towards, we start to come back home to ourselves, to who we really are. We start to trust our internal wisdom. We start to have more capacity to be with that which emerges from within us. It's like a whisper, a call. It's how we find ourselves here and listening this morning, the part of us that wishes to explore who we are authentically. This is the journey of a lifetime. It's transformative, it's powerful, it's beautiful, it's challenging, it's healing, it's all the things all at once. And so when we look to make that a manageable experience, part of it is allowing more of who we are without judgment for what shows up to be present. As part of the work that I do, I draw on the wisdom of Joanna Macy and practical Buddhism in the work of what's called the Great Turning. And so I want to invite you today into a small meditative practice, employing one of those tools. So I invite you to first notice your body, to simply come into connection with self, your breath, your being. Take a moment to notice the miracle of being present here right now. To nod to the internal universes that are within you, the aspects that seemingly seem like polarities but aren't. Those are the necessary tensions that grow you into being. that hold you as a whole, healed person, just as you are right now. I want you to play for a moment, if you're willing, in what it would look like to imagine something that brings you discomfort. And I'm not talking about maybe your most uncomfortable thing, just something that's bringing you discomfort right now. Notice that. Maybe notice what it feels like to think about that. That discomfort, allowing it to be there. Maybe drawing on thoughts or beliefs that emerge when you think about this discomfort, this thing you're holding that's uncomfortable. Maybe noticing feelings that want to arise when holding this thing that is uncomfortable. And again, we're not doing anything about this. We're just simply noticing and allowing to be what is to be there as it is. And now for a moment, I invite you to interact with this discomfort and ask it simply, what wisdom are you seeking to offer me? What wisdom are you seeking to offer me? I invite you, if you're open to it, to offer gratitude to this discomfort and the teacher, the wisdom. Now, if you're open to it, I invite you to place where you feel this discomfort in your body. If you can notice, where does it feel uncomfortable, and place your hands there. Now, if you're open to it, to draw your hands down your body and down your legs, and imagine allowing that discomfort to go into the earth that is holding you. And again, maybe a few more times, running your hands down your body, giving it to the earth, the connection, the roots that you are a part of. You are not separate from this. You just see yourself as part of this bigger space with this bigger holding place. And allowing that discomfort to move down the body and into the earth, to notice that connection. If you're open to it, maybe rubbing your own arms, doing self-touch that reminds you that you are connected right now in this body. And taking a moment with loving, compassionate curiosity to notice what it is like to allow that aspect to exist while holding a multiplicity of other aspects that exist. Simply allow something to be, and to stretch out our capacity to be with more of that. The song we are closing with today says, "Loosen, loosen, baby. You don't have to carry the weight of the world in your body, your bones. Let go, let go, let go." And when we do that letting go, that rooting back into the earth, we don't disconnect from all that is. We connect to something bigger than ourselves. We connect to awareness that we are one, that we are held. We are never alone. How could we be alone when there is earth, when there is water, when there is air, when there is fire, when there is space and universe above us? We are not alone. We are so incredibly connected.